I sat in the back row of Harvard's graduation ceremony, watching my sister Emily receive her diploma with honors, while our parents beamed with pride. My father loudly announced to nearby families that Emily would inherit their $14 million Manhattan penthouse and the new Tesla, calling her our brilliant daughter. The same parents who spent 25 years calling me the slow one and not college material. But when a distinguished man in an expensive suit approached me with a manila envelope and whispered, "Mr. Thompson, it's time to show them who you really are," everything changed. The crimson banners fluttered in the June breeze as hundreds of graduates crossed the stage in Cambridge. I pulled my baseball cap lower, hoping to blend into the sea of proud families surrounding me. My stomach churned as I watched Emily shake hands with the dean, her smile radiant under the afternoon sun. She looked perfect in her cap and gown, everything our parents had always wanted in a child. I thought back to growing up in our sprawling Upper East Side apartment, where every conversation seemed to revolve around Emily's latest achievement. While she brought home straight-A report cards, I struggled to read basic sentences. My parents, Richard and Margaret Thompson, built their fortune, developing luxury real estate across Manhattan. They understood numbers, profit margins, and market trends. They had no patience for a son who couldn't grasp multiplication tables or spell simple words correctly. "Jack just needs to apply himself more," my mother would tell concerned teachers during parent conferences. But I was applying myself. I stayed up late every night, trying to make sense of letters that seemed to dance and flip on the page. Words looked like puzzles with missing pieces, and no amount of effort could force them into clarity. Emily never struggled with anything academic. She devoured books while I pretended to read, moving my eyes across pages filled with meaningless symbols. She solved complex math problems while I counted on my fingers. She wrote eloquent essays while I fought to construct basic sentences. Our parents sent her to exclusive private schools like Dalton and Spence while I attended the local public middle school. "We're investing our resources where they'll have the greatest impact," my father explained when I asked why Emily got private tutors, while I got lectures about trying harder. The message was clear. I wasn't worth the investment. By high school, the pattern was set. Emily was the golden child destined for Ivy League success. I was the disappointment they tolerated with resigned sighs and lowered expectations. When Emily scored 1,500 on her SATs, our parents threw a celebration dinner. When I barely managed to graduate high school with a 2.1 GPA, they acted like I'd accomplished something shameful. I tried community college for one semester after graduation, but the traditional classroom environment felt like torture. Letters still jumbled together, professors spoke too fast, and I couldn't process information the way other students did. When I dropped out, my parents' disappointment was palpable but not surprising. They'd been expecting me to fail for years. For the past 7 years, I'd been living in a tiny studio apartment in Queens, working various jobs to pay rent. Restaurant server, retail clerk, delivery driver, warehouse worker. My parents saw these as proof of their assessment. I was exactly what they'd predicted, a underachieving adult who couldn't handle real responsibility. Family gatherings became exercises in endurance. Emily would share updates about Harvard, her internships, her academic honors. I would sit quietly, answering brief questions about my latest temporary job, while my parents changed the subject as quickly as possible. They introduced Emily as our daughter, the Harvard student. They introduced me as our son, Jack. Today felt like the culmination of everything. Emily was graduating summa cum laude with a degree in economics. She had already been accepted to Columbia Law School and had a summer internship lined up at a prestigious Manhattan firm. At 26, she was everything our parents had dreamed of: brilliant, accomplished, and financially promising. I watched my father stand up and applaud as Emily's name was called. He pulled out his phone to record the moment, just like Head recorded every milestone in her academic career. I couldn't remember him ever recording anything I did. "That's our girl," my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's going to change the world." After the ceremony, we gathered with other families in Harvard Yard. The June air buzzed with excitement and congratulations. Parents posed for pictures with their newly graduated children. My father immediately began networking with other families, dropping hints about his real estate empire and Emily's bright future. "Emily's going to inherit everything," he announced to a group of impressed parents. "We've got a $14 million penthouse in Manhattan, and she's getting the new Tesla as a graduation gift. Smart investments in smart children, that's what it's all about." I stood at the edge of the group, invisible as always. Nobody asked about my plans or accomplishments. I was just Emily's brother, the Thompson family's footnote. That's when I noticed the man in the expensive charcoal suit walking directly toward me. He was tall, probably in his 50s, with silver hair and the confident stride of someone accustomed to boardrooms and high-stakes meetings. His suit looked custom-tailored, and his leather briefcase screamed executive power. He stopped right in front of me, extending a manila envelope with my name written in elegant script across the front. "Mr. Thompson," he said quietly, his voice carrying authority despite the low volume. "I'm David Chen, your lawyer and business manager. It's time to show them who you really are." My hands trembled as I accepted the envelope. Lawyer? Business manager? I didn't have either of those things. I lived paycheck to paycheck in Queens, surviving on ramen noodles and whatever tips I earned from my latest service job. "I think you have the wrong person," I whispered, glancing around nervously. My parents were still holding court 20 feet away, completely unaware of this conversation. David smiled knowingly. "Michael Thompson, also known as Jack Thompson, age 28, founder and CEO of Thompson Digital Solutions, creator of the ExcessiFlow software suite. Ring any bells?" My blood turned to ice water. Nobody knew about Michael Thompson except me. Nobody knew about ExcessiFlow except a handful of beta testers and potential investors. I'd spent 6 years building my company in complete secrecy, using my middle name and a post office box to keep my real identity hidden. "How do you—" I started, but David cut me off. "The Microsoft acquisition closes in 72 hours, he continued. "The paperwork requires your legal signature as Jack Thompson, not Michael Thompson. Your identity protection protocols expire today. The business world is about to learn that the supposedly failed Thompson son is actually one of the most innovative entrepreneurs in accessibility technology." The envelope felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my hands. Everything I'd worked to keep separate was about to collide. My family's world of disappointment and low expectations was about to meet my secret world of innovation and success. David checked his expensive watch. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks, but you've been maintaining radio silence. The lawyers need your decision today. Are you ready to step into the light, Jack?" I looked over at my family, still celebrating Emily's graduation and discussing her inheritance of assets that would pale in comparison to what waited inside this envelope. For 28 years, they'd seen me as the slow one, the failure, the disappointment who couldn't live up to their standards. They had no idea that their standards had never mattered to me. While they were measuring success with traditional metrics, I was building something revolutionary. While they were investing in Emily's conventional path, I was creating my own. I broke the seal on the envelope, knowing that whatever was inside would change everything forever. My fingers shook as I pulled out the documents, expecting maybe a job offer or some kind of mistake. Instead, I found myself staring at legal papers that made my vision blur with shock. Incorporation documents for Thompson Digital Solutions showing my name as founder and CEO. Financial statements revealing $32 million in company assets and a letter from Goldman Sachs confirming the pending acquisition by Microsoft for $250 million. The numbers didn't compute at first. 250 million. I read it 3 times. My dyslexic brain struggling to process the magnitude. This couldn't be real. I was Jack Thompson, the family screw-up who couldn't even finish community college. David watched my reaction with patient understanding. I know it's overwhelming. You've been so focused on building the technology that you haven't been tracking the business valuations. Your accessibility software suite is revolutionary, Jack. Microsoft isn't just buying a product. They're buying the future of inclusive technology. I flipped through page after page of documents I'd never seen before. Patent approvals for software innovations ID developed in my cramped Queens apartment. Licensing agreements with major corporations who'd been beta testing my applications. Revenue projections that made my head spin. How is this possible? I whispered, my voice barely audible over the celebration happening around us in Harvard Yard. I've been living on tips and part-time wages because you insisted on reinvesting every dollar back into development, David explained. You've been paying yourself a minimal salary while building an empire. The company has been profitable for 3 years, but you've poured everything into research, development, and beta testing programs. The realization hit me like a physical blow. For 6 years, while my family thought I was drifting between dead-end jobs, I'd actually been conducting the most sophisticated market research possible. Every restaurant where I'd waited tables taught me about point-of-sale accessibility for workers with learning differences. Every retail position showed me how dyslexic employees navigated inventory systems. Every delivery job revealed transportation and navigation challenges faced by people with cognitive processing differences. I hadn't been failing at traditional jobs. I'd been gathering real-world data to develop software solutions that actually worked for people like me. The ExcessiveFlow suite is already being used by over 40 major corporations. David continued, pulling out his tablet to show me usage statistics I'd never seen compiled. Your workplace accessibility applications have improved productivity for neurodiverse employees by an average of 67%. Your educational support tools are being tested in 12 school districts across 5 states. My throat felt dry as desert sand, but I never marketed anything. I just built prototypes and tested them with people who needed help. You built relationships, David corrected. Every person you helped became an advocate. Every workplace that saw improved performance became a reference client. You created a grassroots network of support that money can't buy. Microsoft isn't just acquiring your technology. They're acquiring your reputation as someone who actually understands accessibility challenges because you've lived them. I thought about the late nights in my studio apartment, coding by lamplight because I couldn't afford better lighting. I thought about the dozens of people I'd met through various jobs who struggled with similar learning challenges. I'd started building simple apps to help them, never imagining it would become anything more than personal side projects. The dyslexia. I said slowly, pieces clicking together in my mind. That's why the software works so well. Exactly. David nodded. You didn't design for theoretical users. You designed for yourself and people like you. You understood the problems because you experienced them daily. That authenticity is why your solutions are so effective. I looked across the yard at my parents, who were still basking in Emily's graduation glory. They had no idea that their dumb son had spent years solving problems they couldn't even understand existed. While they invested in Emily's traditional education, it'd been creating something genuinely innovative. Why didn't you contact me sooner? I asked David. You specifically requested minimal contact during development phases, he replied. You wanted to focus on building without distraction from business concerns. But the Microsoft acquisition requires immediate attention. They want to announce the deal next week. The weight of 6 years hit me at once. All those family dinners where I sat quietly while they discussed Emily's achievements. All those times I felt like a failure because I couldn't meet their traditional definitions of success. All the moments I wondered if they were right about my limitations. I hadn't been limited. It'd been focused on something they couldn't see or value. "Your parents," David said gently, noticing my gaze. "Do they know about the company?" I shook my head. Nobody in my family knows. I kept everything completely separate. I didn't want them involved if it failed, and, if it succeeded, that question hung in the air like a challenge. It'd been so focused on avoiding their disappointment that it'd never considered what their reaction might be to genuine success. Part of me had been protecting them from my potential failure, but another part had been protecting my success from their judgment. The documents felt heavier as the reality settled in. I wasn't just successful. I was about to become extraordinarily wealthy. The kid they'd written off as not college material was about to close one of the largest technology acquisitions of the year. "What happens now?" I asked. David smiled. "Now you decide how you want to handle this revelation. You can continue keeping your success private, or you can step forward and claim your achievements. But either way, the acquisition paperwork requires your legal identity. Jack Thompson, not Michael Thompson." I watched my father gesturing enthusiastically to another parent, probably describing Emily's bright future in law. I watched my mother taking pictures of Emily with her diploma, the same proud expression worn at every academic milestone. They'd spent my entire life seeing me as evidence that their parenting approach worked for some children, but not others. Emily responded to their methods. I didn't. Emily justified their investments. I didn't. Emily made them proud. I didn't. But what if their approach had never been right for me? What if it needed something completely different, and my struggles hadn't been failures, but redirections toward my actual strengths? "There's something else," David said, pulling out his phone. "Microsoft wants to meet with you personally before finalizing the deal. They're interested in bringing you on as head of their new Accessibility Innovation Division. This isn't just about buying your company. They want your continued leadership, head of a division at Microsoft. The same Microsoft that my father occasionally mentioned as an example of smart business investing. The same Microsoft that Emily had written business case studies about in her Harvard courses. I was about to become exactly the kind of success they understood and respected, but in a way they'd never expected or encouraged. The envelope also contained a letter addressed specifically to me, written in David's firm letterhead. It outlined the timeline for the acquisition, my options for continued involvement with Microsoft, and the tax implications of the deal. Reading it felt surreal, like discovering it'd been living someone else's life without realizing it. "Jack," David said quietly, "you've built something remarkable. Your technology is going to help millions of people who struggle with learning differences. You've turned your greatest challenge into your greatest contribution." I folded the documents carefully, sliding them back into the envelope. Across the yard, Emily was posing for more pictures, radiant in her graduation gown. My parents stood on either side of her, the picture of pride and accomplishment. For the first time in my life, I understood that I had something to be proud of, too. Something I'd built with my own hands and my own mind, despite every message I'd received about my limitations. The question was whether I was ready to show them who I really was. I walked across Harvard Yard toward my family, the envelope feeling like evidence in my hands. My father was in full networking mode, telling a circle of parents about Emily's law school prospects and their family's real estate empire. My approach went unnoticed until I was standing directly beside him. "Dad," I said quietly, extending the envelope toward him. "I need to show you something." Richard Thompson barely glanced at me, his attention focused on impressing the other parents. "Not now, Jack." We're celebrating Emily's achievement. Whatever job application you want us to look at can wait until we get home." The assumption stung, but not as much as it would have yesterday. I stood my ground, holding the envelope steady. "It's not a job application. Please, just look at it." My mother noticed the tension first. Margaret Thompson had spent years managing family dynamics, smoothing over my failures and highlighting Emily's successes. She stepped closer, her social radar sensing potential embarrassment. "What's this about, Jack?" she asked, her voice carrying the patient tone she used when dealing with my problems. "Just read the papers," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "All of them." Richard sighed dramatically, making sure the other parents witnessed his martyrdom in dealing with his difficult son. He took the envelope and broke the seal, pulling out the first document with theatrical reluctance. His expression changed immediately. The color drained from his face as he read the Goldman Sachs letterhead and the financial figures. His hands started shaking. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice losing all its earlier confidence. Margaret moved closer, reading over his shoulder. Her sharp intake of breath drew Emily's attention from her admirers. "Thompson Digital Solutions." My mother read aloud, her voice filled with confusion. "Acquisition price, $250 million. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Jack, what is this? Some kind of joke?" Emily abandoned her celebration and hurried over, snatching the papers from our father's trembling hands. She read quickly, her economics degree helping her process the business terminology faster than our parents. "These look legitimate," she said slowly, her voice filled with something I'd never heard before. Uncertainty about her place in the family hierarchy. "Jack, how do you know about this company? Did someone offer you a job there?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 6 years of secrecy. "I don't know about the company, Emily. I own it. I founded it. I built it." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Other families continued celebrating around us, but our little group had become an island of shock in the sea of Harvard graduation joy. "That's impossible," my father said finally. "You work in restaurants, you deliver food. You couldn't run a technology company." "I've been running it for 6 years," I replied calmly. Every job I took taught me something different about workplace accessibility. Every person I met who struggled with learning differences became part of my research. While you thought I was failing at life, I was building solutions for people like me. Emily flipped through more documents, her face growing paler with each page. Patent approvals, revenue statements, corporate partnerships. She looked up at me like she was seeing a stranger. "Jack, this says you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The Microsoft acquisition closes this week," I confirmed. "My lawyer was trying to reach me because they need my legal signature." My mother sat down heavily on a nearby bench, the papers scattered in her lap. "This doesn't make sense. You dropped out of college. You've never shown any interest in business or technology." "I've always been interested in solving problems," I corrected. "You just never paid attention to the problems I was trying to solve." When I couldn't read traditional textbooks, I learned through audio programs and hands-on experience. When I couldn't process information the way teachers presented it, I found other ways to learn. You saw failure. I was actually developing different skills. Richard grabbed my arm, his grip desperate. "Jack, if this is real, if you're really this successful." He paused, and I could see him calculating something behind his eyes. "We need to talk privately. There are things about our family finances that you need to know." Something in his tone sent ice through my veins. "What things?" My parents exchanged a look loaded with panic and guilt. Emily noticed the exchange too, her attention shifting from the business documents to our parents' faces. "Dad," she said slowly. "What's wrong?" You look terrified. Margaret started crying then, not tears of pride or joy, but something much more desperate. We thought we had time, she whispered. We thought Emily's career would give us time to fix everything. Fix what? I demanded. Richard's confidence completely crumbled. The man who'd spent my entire life projecting authority and success looked like he was about to collapse. The money, he said, barely above a whisper. The $14 million penthouse, the real estate empire, Emily's inheritance. None of it's real anymore. Emily's face went white. What do you mean it's not real? We've been borrowing against future projections for years, Margaret explained through her tears. The real estate market shifted. Several major deals fell through, and we've been using creative financing to maintain our lifestyle. Creative financing, I pressed. We owe $7 million to investors, Richard admitted. Money we borrowed planning to repay it with Emily's high earnings from law school and your mother's expected inheritance from her aunt. We mortgaged everything against Emily's potential future income. The revelation hit Emily like a physical blow. You mortgaged my future? Without telling me. We thought you'd be making $300,000 a year as a corporate lawyer, Margaret said defensively. We thought we could pay everything back within 5 years. Emily staggered backward. I'm not going to law school. I barely graduated from Harvard. My grades weren't good enough for Columbia. Now, it was my parents' turn to look shocked. What do you mean you're not going to law school? Richard asked. I've been working as a paralegal and telling you I was attending classes, Emily confessed. My grades senior year were terrible. I was so stressed about living up to your expectations that I couldn't focus. I barely managed to graduate. The family fortune was a lie. Emily's future career was a lie. My supposed failure was a lie. We stood in Harvard Yard, surrounded by genuine celebration, while our family's entire foundation crumbled beneath us. There's more, Richard said, his voice barely audible. The investors we borrowed from, they're not patient people. When they find out Emily isn't going to earn what we projected. He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. My family wasn't just financially ruined. They were potentially in physical danger. And somehow, impossibly, the family disappointment had become their only hope for salvation. We found a quiet corner of Harvard Yard, away from the celebrating families. My parents sat on a stone bench, looking like defendants awaiting sentencing. Emily paced back and forth, still clutching my business documents, while I stood trying to process the magnitude of lies that had shaped our family dynamic. Start from the beginning, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me. How long has this been going on? Richard rubbed his temples, looking every one of his 55 years. The real estate business started struggling about 8 years ago. The market changed, zoning laws shifted, and several major developments we'd invested in fell through. Instead of scaling back our lifestyle, we started borrowing against future projects. 8 years. Emily stopped pacing. You've been lying about our financial situation for 8 years. We thought it was temporary, Margaret said defensively. Your father's business had always been profitable. We expected things to turn around, but they didn't, I stated. No, Richard admitted. They got worse. We had to keep borrowing to pay previous loans. When you were accepted to Harvard, Emily, we saw an opportunity. We convinced investors that supporting your education was a guaranteed return on investment. A Harvard graduate in corporate law would easily earn enough to justify the financial support. Emily sank into a nearby chair, her graduation cap askew. So my education was financed through fraud. Not fraud, Margaret protested. Strategic planning. We genuinely believed you'd be successful enough to make everyone whole. Except Emily was never planning to become a corporate lawyer, I pointed out, which means your entire repayment strategy was based on another lie. The silence that followed was broken by David Chen approaching our group. He had forgotten he was still nearby, probably wondering why our family reunion looked more like a crisis intervention than a celebration. "Jack," he said carefully, "is everything all right? You looked like you were having an intense conversation." "David, this is my family," I said, gesturing toward the wreckage of revelations around us. "My parents, Richard and Margaret Thompson, and my sister Emily. They were just explaining how they've been committing financial fraud for the better part of a decade." David's expression immediately shifted to professional concern. "I see. Perhaps this conversation should continue somewhere more private." "No," I said firmly. "I'm tired of secrets and lies. They need to understand what they've done." My phone buzzed with an incoming call. David glanced at the screen and frowned. "Jack, this is Agent Williams from the FBI. She's been trying to reach you regarding your company." "FBI?" My stomach dropped. "Why would the FBI want to talk to me? Your company has been under federal investigation," David explained as he answered the call. "Not for wrongdoing," he added quickly, seeing my panic, "because someone has been attempting to steal your intellectual property." He spoke briefly with Agent Williams, then hung up with a grim expression. "She needs to meet with us immediately. There's been a development in the case." "What case?" Emily asked, her voice high with stress. David looked directly at my parents. "The investigation into corporate espionage targeting Jack's technology. Apparently, the theft attempts have been traced back to someone with connections to your family." Richard went even paler. "What do you mean?" "Agent Williams will explain everything, but she mentioned a name. Gerald Martinez. Does that name mean anything to you?" My parents' faces went ashen. Margaret actually gasped. "Gerald is Dad's business partner," Emily said slowly. "Has been working with our father for about 5 years." David nodded grimly. "Agent Williams believes Mr. Martinez has been using your father's financial desperation to gain access to information about Jack's company. The timing isn't coincidental. The pieces clicked together in my mind with sickening clarity. You told Gerald about me, about my work. We didn't know what your work was," Richard protested. "We thought you were just doing odd jobs. But you talked about me," I pressed. "You complained about your disappointing son. You shared details about my life." Margaret's tears were flowing freely now. Gerald was sympathetic. He said he understood difficult family dynamics. "We may have mentioned that you were working in technology support." "Technology support," I repeated. "You were troubleshooting computer problems for restaurants and small businesses," Emily said. "We thought you were doing basic tech repair work." David's phone rang again. This time he put the call on speaker. "This is Agent Sarah Williams, FBI," came a crisp voice. "I need to speak with Jack Thompson immediately. We have evidence that Gerald Martinez has been systematically stealing intellectual property from multiple technology entrepreneurs, and Mr. Thompson's company appears to be his primary target." My legs felt weak. 6 years of work, 6 years of building something meaningful, and my family's financial crimes had made me a target for federal criminals. "Agent Williams," I said, "this is Jack Thompson. Mr. Thompson, we need your immediate cooperation in a sting operation. Mr. Martinez believes he has successfully obtained samples of your source code through his relationship with your family. Is planning to sell that information to foreign competitors before your Microsoft acquisition is announced." "But I never gave anyone my source code," I protested. "No, but Mr. Martinez has been very creative in his theft attempts. We believe he's been using your family's financial vulnerability to manipulate them into providing personal information about you. Information he's used to hack into your systems and steal proprietary data." Emily stood up abruptly. "This is my fault." Everyone turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Last year, Gerald asked me to help him understand more about what you were doing. He said he was impressed that you were working in technology and wanted to offer you opportunities." I did some research. I found your social media accounts under the name Michael Thompson. I found references to software development projects. My heart stopped. You told Gerald about Michael Thompson. I thought I was helping, Emily said, her voice breaking. I thought maybe Gerald could give you a real job, help you build a career. I had no idea he was a criminal. Agent Williams' voice cut through our family drama. Mr. Thompson, we need you to proceed with your Microsoft meeting as scheduled, but you'll be wearing surveillance equipment. We need to record Mr. Martinez attempting to interfere with the acquisition using stolen materials. This is the only way we can prove federal charges against him. David looked at me with concern. Jack, you don't have to agree to this. We can postpone the Microsoft deal until the investigation is resolved. What happens to my family if Gerald gets away with this? I asked. Mr. Martinez has been financing his technology theft operations partially through money laundered from your parents' real estate deals, Agent Williams explained. If we can't prove federal crimes, your parents could face serious charges for financial fraud. But if we can demonstrate that they were unknowing victims of a larger criminal conspiracy, we may be able to negotiate immunity in exchange for their cooperation. My family's future depended on my willingness to help catch the criminal they'd accidentally led to my doorstep. The irony was overwhelming. They'd spent years seeing me as the family burden, and now I was their only hope for avoiding federal prosecution. He'll do it, I said. Jack, no, Emily protested. This is dangerous. I looked at my sister, my parents, the people who'd never believed in me but who were still my family. It's the right thing to do. 2 hours later, we sat in a nondescript federal building in downtown Boston. Agent Sarah Williams was younger than it expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and the kind of professional intensity that suggested she'd seen every possible variation of white-collar crime. Gerald Martinez isn't just stealing from you, Jack, she explained, spreading photographs and documents across the conference table. Has been running a sophisticated international operation, targeting American entrepreneurs in emerging technology sectors. The photos showed Gerald at various business meetings, airports, and corporate events. I recognized him from family gatherings, but seeing him in this context made my skin crawl. He specifically targets inventors who are isolated from traditional support networks, Agent Williams continued. People who might not have strong legal protections or business advisors. People whose families might not understand or value their work. The profile fit me perfectly. How long have you been investigating him? David asked. 2 years. We've connected him to at least 12 cases of corporate espionage, but proving federal charges requires catching him in the act of selling stolen American technology to foreign buyers. She pulled out a thick folder labeled with my name. Your case is our best opportunity because Gerald has been particularly aggressive in targeting your company. Has made multiple attempts to hack your systems, tried to recruit your beta testers, and even attempted to plant someone as a fake investor. How do you know all this? I asked. Because we've been monitoring his communications since last year. The problem is that most of his activity happens through encrypted channels and overseas transactions. We need evidence of him attempting to interfere with your Microsoft deal using stolen materials. Agent Williams opened another folder, and my blood went cold. Inside were printouts of emails between Gerald and my father, dating back 3 years. Your parents weren't just unknowing victims, Jack. Gerald has been systematically manipulating your father's financial desperation to gain intelligence about your life and work. She handed me one of the emails. Richard had written, Jack is doing some kind of computer work now. Gerald says he might have opportunities for him, but Jack never talks to us about what he's actually doing. Gerald's response was calculating. Don't worry, Richard. He'll figure out what Jack is working on. Sometimes the quiet ones are hiding the most interesting projects. Has been using you. I said to my father, who looked like he wanted to disappear. Gerald offered to help, Richard said weakly. He said he had connections in technology. We thought maybe he could give you career guidance. Agent Williams pulled out more emails. Mr. Martinez has been playing a long game, has been cultivating your family's trust while gathering intelligence. Every family dinner, every conversation about Jack's work, every detail you shared was being passed along to his criminal network. I felt violated in a way I'd never experienced. My family's disappointment in me had been bad enough, but learning that their discussions of my supposed failures had been feeding information to criminals was devastating. There's something else, Agent Williams said, her tone becoming even more serious. Something we discovered just this morning. She pulled out a DNA analysis report with Gerald Martinez's name on it. We ran background checks on everyone connected to your family's financial situation. Gerald Martinez isn't just your father's business partner. According to medical records we subpoenaed, he's your biological father. The conference room went silent. Emily dropped the pen she'd been holding. My mother made a sound like she was choking. That's impossible, Richard said, but his voice carried no conviction. 28 years ago, Margaret Thompson had an affair with Gerald Martinez. Agent Williams continued. Medical records from her pregnancy with Jack show she requested DNA testing. The results confirmed Gerald was the biological father. I felt like the floor was falling away beneath me. Everything I thought I knew about my identity was crumbling. Gerald knows, I asked. Has known for years. We believe that's part of why he targeted your family specifically. He sees your success as something he's entitled to profit from. Margaret was sobbing openly now. He left me when I told him I was pregnant. He said he didn't want children. I married Richard because he was willing to raise you as his own. But Gerald came back, Agent Williams said. He returned as a successful businessman and inserted himself into your family's life through the real estate partnership. Has been manipulating all of you for years. The revelation explained so much. Why Gerald always seemed interested in my whereabouts and activities. Why had been so helpful when my parents needed financial assistance. Why had encouraged them to share details about my life. Has been planning this for years, I said slowly. He abandoned me as a baby, then came back to steal from me as an adult. And your parents' financial crimes provided him with the perfect leverage, Agent Williams added. They needed his money to maintain their lifestyle, which meant they couldn't refuse his requests for information about you. David had been quiet throughout this revelation, but now he spoke up. What exactly do you need Jack to do? Gerald believes he has obtained usable samples of Jack's source code through various hacking attempts. Tomorrow, he's planning to attend the Microsoft acquisition meeting and present prior art evidence that would invalidate Jack's patents. He thinks this will force Microsoft to deal directly with him instead. Can he actually do that? I asked. Not legally, David said. But he could create enough confusion and legal challenges to delay the acquisition for months or years. Agent Williams nodded. We need Jack to proceed with the meeting as planned, wearing surveillance equipment. When Gerald presents his stolen materials and claims ownership rights, we'll have him on federal charges of corporate espionage, patent fraud, and conspiracy. What about my family? I asked. What happens to them? If Gerald is convicted of the federal charges, we can demonstrate that your parents were victims of manipulation rather than willing participants in fraud. Their cooperation with this operation would weigh heavily in any sentencing recommendations. Emily had been silent since the DNA revelation, but now she spoke up. I helped him, she said quietly. I researched Jack's activities and gave Gerald information. Doesn't that make me guilty of something? You were unknowingly assisting in a federal investigation, Agent Williams said carefully. Your research helped us understand how Gerald was gathering intelligence. If you're willing to testify about your interactions with him, that would be valuable evidence. I looked around the conference room at my fractured family. My parents, guilty of financial crimes but manipulated by a master criminal. My sister, trying to help but unknowingly betraying me. My biological father, a federal suspect who'd been orchestrating my family's destruction for years, and me, the supposed failure who'd somehow become the key to everyone's salvation. "I'll wear the wire," I said. "But I want guarantees about my family's protection." "Jack, you don't have to do this for us," Emily said. "We created this mess." "No," I corrected her. "Gerald created this mess. You just got caught in it." Agent Williams smiled for the first time since I'd met her. "We'll have federal agents positioned throughout the building during tomorrow's meeting. You'll be completely protected. And afterward?" I asked. "Afterward, you'll be free to enjoy your success without looking over your shoulder, and your family will have a chance to rebuild their lives honestly." As we prepared to leave the federal building, I realized that tomorrow's meeting with Microsoft would determine more than just my financial future. It would finally expose the truth about who had really been holding my family back all these years. It hadn't been me. The Microsoft offices occupied 3 floors of a gleaming Manhattan skyscraper. I arrived 30 minutes early, the surveillance equipment hidden beneath my best shirt feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. David had coached me through the technology, but nothing could prepare me for the psychological pressure of knowingly walking into a confrontation with the man who was both my biological father and my would-be destroyer. The conference room overlooked Central Park, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that would normally take my breath away. Instead, I felt like I was looking at the world through bulletproof glass, everything seeming distant and surreal. 3 Microsoft executives waited at the polished conference table. Jennifer Walsh, Vice President of Acquisitions, Michael Chang, Head of Accessibility Development, and Robert Harrison, Corporate Legal Counsel. They'd been briefed that this meeting might include unexpected participants, but they had no idea they were about to witness a federal sting operation. "Mr. Thompson," Jennifer said warmly, "we're incredibly excited about this acquisition. Your accessibility innovations represent exactly the kind of inclusive technology Microsoft wants to lead." Before I could respond, the conference room doors opened, and Gerald Martinez entered with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the cards. He was exactly as I remembered from family gatherings. Tall, silver-haired, expensively dressed, and radiating the kind of charm that had fooled my parents for years. "I apologize for the interruption," Gerald said smoothly. "But there are some legal complications regarding this acquisition that need immediate attention." The Microsoft executives looked confused. David, who had been sitting quietly beside me, leaned forward. "And you are Gerald Martinez, representing the Martinez Technology Group. We hold certain intellectual property rights that are relevant to this discussion." I felt the surveillance equipment against my chest and forced myself to remain calm. This was it. Gerald was about to incriminate himself in front of federal agents listening from the next room. "I'm not familiar with your company," Jennifer said carefully. "What intellectual property rights are you claiming?" Gerald opened his briefcase with theatrical confidence. "I have documentation proving that the core innovations in Thomson Digital Solutions were developed using proprietary algorithms owned by my company." He spread papers across the conference table, code snippets, algorithm flowcharts, and patent applications with his name on them. "This is impossible," Michael Chang said, examining the documents. "These appear to be recent forgeries based on Mr. Thompson's existing patents." "Not forgeries," Gerald replied smoothly. "Prior art. These algorithms were developed in my laboratories over 2 years ago. Mr. Thompson had access to this research through family connections." My throat went dry. Gerald wasn't just claiming ownership of my innovations. He was suggesting that I'd stolen them from him. "That's a serious accusation," Robert Harrison said. Mr. Thompson, do you have any response to these claims? I looked at Gerald. This man who'd abandoned me before birth and returned to destroy everything I'd built. Where exactly did you get access to my source code to create these forgeries? Gerald's smile was cold and calculating. Son, I didn't need to access anything. I created the original work. You simply refined my research. Son. The word hit the room like a bomb. I'm sorry, Jennifer interrupted. Did you just claim to be Mr. Thompson's father? Biological father, Gerald confirmed, which gives me certain legal rights regarding intellectual property developed by my offspring using resources I provided. David had warned me this might happen. Gerald was playing his ultimate card, claiming paternal ownership of my achievements. You provided no resources, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You abandoned my mother when she was pregnant. You had no role in my upbringing, education, or development. But I returned, Gerald said. I've been supporting your family financially for years. Your parents' real estate business, your sister's education, even the apartment building where you've been living. All financed through my investments. The room spun around me. What are you talking about? The building in Queens where you've had your studio apartment? I own it. The restaurant jobs, the retail positions, the delivery services where you've worked, all businesses that receive financial backing from my investment group. I've been observing your development for years, ensuring you had access to the right environments to test and refine my original algorithms. This was beyond anything Agent Williams had prepared me for. Gerald wasn't just claiming to own my innovations. He was suggesting that my entire adult life had been an elaborate laboratory for his benefit. You're lying, I said, but doubt crept into my voice. Gerald pulled out his phone and showed me photographs. Surveillance images of me working at various jobs, detailed reports about my daily routines, and copies of apartment lease agreements with his company's name in the financial guarantor section. I've been your silent benefactor, Jack. Every job opportunity, every living situation, every chance encounter that led to your software innovations was carefully orchestrated. You think you built this company independently, but you were actually conducting research and development for my organization. The Microsoft executives looked horrified. Mr. Martinez, Jennifer said slowly, are you claiming that you've been conducting unauthorized surveillance of Mr. Thompson? I'm claiming that I've been protecting and guiding my son's career development, Gerald replied. Everything he's accomplished is the result of opportunities I provided. Robert Harrison was rapidly taking notes. This is highly irregular. We may need to postpone this acquisition until these ownership claims can be resolved. That's exactly what Gerald wanted. Chaos, confusion, and delay that would give him time to steal my innovations and sell them elsewhere. I touched the surveillance device beneath my shirt, knowing that federal agents were recording every word. Gerald was incriminating himself with each claim, but he was also potentially destroying my deal with Microsoft. I need to see proof of these ownership claims, I said, hoping to draw out more evidence of his criminal activities. Gerald smiled triumphantly and pulled out a thick folder. Complete documentation. Patent applications predating yours by 18 months. Financial records proving my investment in your living and working situations. Even DNA evidence confirming my paternal rights to intellectual property you developed using my resources. He spread the evidence across the table like a winning poker hand. That's when I realized the most devastating truth of all. Some of the documents looked legitimate. Gerald hadn't just been stealing my current work, had been planning this theft for years, creating a paper trail that could actually support his claims. There's one more thing, Gerald said, his voice taking on a crueler edge. Your sister Emily has been working with me for over a year, providing detailed information about your projects and innovations. She's been my primary intelligence source. The words hit me like physical blows. Emily's betrayal went deeper than anyone had realized. "That's not possible," I whispered. Gerald pulled out his phone again and played an audio recording. Emily's voice filled the conference room. "Jack's been working on something big with accessibility software, has been secretive about it, but I think he might actually have developed something valuable. Can you really help him get better opportunities?" My sister's voice continued. "Has using the name Michael Thompson for his business projects. I found his patent applications online. The technology looks really innovative. The recording was time-stamped from 8 months ago. Gerald had evidence that Emily had knowingly and repeatedly provided information that enabled his theft of my intellectual property. As I sat in that conference room, surrounded by documents claiming to prove that my greatest achievements were stolen, orchestrated, or compromised, I realized that Gerald hadn't just been stealing my technology, had been stealing my entire identity. The stress of the confrontation proved too much for my father. As Gerald spread his fabricated evidence across the Microsoft conference table, Richard Thompson clutched his chest and collapsed. The paramedics arrived within minutes, and we found ourselves racing through Manhattan traffic toward Mount Sinai Hospital. The acquisition meeting abandoned in chaos. Richard was stable but sedated in the cardiac intensive care unit when Agent Williams finally arrested Gerald in the hospital parking garage. I watched through the window as federal agents led him away in handcuffs, his earlier confidence replaced by rage and disbelief that his elaborate plan had failed. The recordings were perfect. Agent Williams told me as we sat in the hospital waiting room. Gerald incriminated himself on multiple federal charges: corporate espionage, patent fraud, stalking, conspiracy, and making false claims to federal investigators. David had retrieved all of Gerald's forged documents from the Microsoft meeting. "The patents are fake," he confirmed. "Expertly created, but the filing dates were altered. Gerald's been building this false prior art case for months, but federal investigators can prove the documents were manufactured after your real patents were approved." My relief was tempered by the devastating revelation about Emily. She sat across from me in the waiting room, her face pale with guilt and shame. "I need to understand," I said to her. "How long were you really working with Gerald?" Emily's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. 2 years, she whispered. "But Jack, you have to understand what really happened." She showed me text message conversations with Gerald that painted a different picture than his recording suggested. The messages revealed that Emily had discovered the truth about my parentage through old family documents Shed found while helping our mother organize papers. "I found the original DNA test results while cleaning out Mom's closet," Emily explained. "I confronted her about it, and she broke down and told me everything. About the affair, about Gerald abandoning her, about Dad agreeing to raise you as his own." The timeline was shocking. Emily had known Gerald was my biological father for 2 full years. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I was trying to protect the family," Emily said, tears streaming down her face. "When Gerald came back into our lives as Dad's business partner, I researched him. I found out he was wealthy and successful, and I thought maybe he felt guilty about abandoning you." She showed me more text messages where Shed been trying to broker some kind of reconciliation between Gerald and our family. "I thought if I could prove to him that you were talented and successful, maybe he'd want a relationship with you. Maybe he'd even help with the family's financial problems." The truth was even more painful than Gerald's version. Emily's betrayal hadn't been calculated greed. It had been misguided family loyalty. "You gave him information about my company," I said. "I thought I was giving him reasons to be proud of you," Emily replied. "Every time I told him about your innovations, I was hoping he'd reach out and offer to help. I had no idea he was planning to steal everything." Agent Williams had been listening to our conversation. "Your sister's text messages actually helped our investigation," she said. Gerald's responses to her information showed clear criminal intent. He was planning this theft long before he had access to your actual technology. Margaret emerged from Richard's hospital room, her face exhausted from the day's revelations. She sat down heavily beside Emily, looking like Shed aged 10 years in the past 24 hours. "How is he?" I asked. "Stable. The doctors say it was stress-induced, not a major blockage. But Jack, he wants to see you." I found Richard awake but weak, connected to monitors that beeped steadily in the quiet room. For the first time in my life, he looked vulnerable instead of disappointed. "I'm sorry," he said as soon as I entered, "for everything. For how we treated you, for not recognizing your talents, for putting our family in danger through my business with Gerald." I sat in the chair beside his bed. "You didn't know what Gerald was planning, but I should have known something was wrong," Richard insisted. "A man doesn't just appear with perfect financial solutions unless he wants something in return." I was so desperate to maintain our lifestyle that I ignored obvious warning signs. He reached for my hand with surprising strength. "You saved us, Jack, not just financially, but from becoming criminals ourselves. If you hadn't been successful enough to warrant federal investigation, Gerald would have destroyed all of us." The irony wasn't lost on me. The family's disappointment had driven me away from their influence, which had protected me from Gerald's manipulation and allowed me to build something authentic. "There's something else I need to tell you," Richard said, his voice growing weaker, "about why we treated you differently than Emily." I braced myself for another revelation. "Margaret and I were terrified that if you succeeded too much, too visibly, Gerald would notice and want to claim you. We thought if we kept your achievements small and private, you'd be safer from his attention." The final piece clicked into place. My parents hadn't just failed to recognize my potential. They'd actively tried to suppress it out of misguided protective instincts. Every time you showed talent or creativity, we worried that Gerald would hear about it and want to exploit you. So we emphasized Emily's achievements instead, hoping to keep you under his radar. Their neglect had been a twisted form of love, but it backfired, I said. Completely. By pushing you away from us, we made you independent and strong enough to build something he couldn't control. And our financial desperation gave him exactly the leverage he needed to monitor you anyway. David appeared in the hospital room doorway. "Jack, I have news about the Microsoft acquisition." I looked up expectantly. "They want to proceed immediately. Gerald's interference actually convinced them that your technology is even more valuable than they initially thought. Someone went to extraordinary criminal lengths to steal it, which proves its market potential." He handed me a revised acquisition agreement. "They're increasing the offer to $350 million, and they want you to head their new Accessibility Innovation Division at a starting salary of $2 million per year. From the family disappointment to Microsoft executive in less than 48 hours. There's one condition," David added. "They want assurance that there are no other family complications that could interfere with your work." I looked at Richard in his hospital bed, at Margaret exhausted in the corner, and thought about Emily waiting in the hallway. My family had been broken by lies, manipulation, and misguided choices. But they were still my family. "No more complications," I said firmly. "Just a family that's going to learn how to be honest with each other." 6 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse in Manhattan as the judge sentenced Gerald Martinez to 15 years in prison for corporate espionage, patent fraud, and racketeering charges. The technology theft ring had been running had stolen innovations from over 30 American entrepreneurs, costing the economy an estimated $500 million in lost intellectual property. Agent Williams had become something of a friend throughout the legal proceedings. "Cases like this are why I joined the FBI," she told me after the sentencing. "One criminal destroyed so many dreams and careers. Seeing him face justice makes all the long hours worth it." My Microsoft acquisition had closed without further complications. $350 million was more money than I'd ever imagined having. But the real satisfaction came from seeing my accessibility software helping people across the country. The Accessibility Innovation Division 1 now employed over 200 people, many of whom had learning differences like me. My family's legal situation had been resolved through plea agreements. Richard and Margaret avoided prison time by repaying all embezzled funds and serving 1,000 hours of community service each. I'd used part of my Microsoft windfall to cover their debts, not because I felt obligated, but because forgiveness felt better than revenge. Richard's heart attack had been a wake-up call about priorities. He and Margaret sold their Manhattan lifestyle and moved to a modest but comfortable home in Westchester. They started a small business consulting operation, helping other entrepreneurs avoid the financial traps that had nearly destroyed them. We're actually happier now, Margaret told me during one of our monthly family dinners. Living within our means, being honest about our situation. It's a relief not to pretend anymore. Emily had enrolled in legitimate law school, using a scholarship I'd established for students from complicated family backgrounds. She was thriving in an environment where she didn't have to carry the weight of family financial expectations. I'm studying corporate ethics, she told me with a wry smile. Turns out there's a lot I need to learn about making better choices. The Thompson Foundation for Learning Differences had become my most meaningful project. We provided grants for innovative educational approaches, funded research into neurodiversity in the workplace, and offered scholarships for students whose learning differences had been misunderstood as limitations. I'd kept my apartment in Queens, though I could afford to live anywhere. Something about staying connected to my roots felt important. The studio apartment where I'd written my first accessibility apps had become a kind of shrine to persistence and authenticity. My relationship with my family had evolved into something none of us had expected. Genuine friendship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Richard had stopped trying to manage my career and started asking about my work with real interest. Margaret had begun volunteering with the foundation, using her organizational skills to help other families navigate learning difference diagnoses. Emily and I had developed the kind of sibling relationship we'd never had as children. Without the pressure of competing for parental approval, we discovered we actually enjoyed each other's company. The Microsoft position allowed me to travel frequently, speaking at conferences about accessibility, technology, and workplace inclusion. Every presentation began with the same message. I was my family's biggest disappointment until I learned that disappointment was just their failure to see my potential. The audiences varied, but the response was always the same. People with their own stories of being underestimated, overlooked, or misunderstood. Parents who realized they might be measuring their children against the wrong standards. Educators who understood they needed to expand their definition of intelligence and success. At one conference in Seattle, a young woman approached me afterward. "I have dyslexia too," she said quietly. "My parents keep telling me I need to work harder, but I'm already working harder than everyone else. How do you make them understand?" "You don't make them understand," I replied. "You understand yourself first. Then you build something so meaningful that understanding follows naturally." She nodded, and I saw in her eyes the same determination I'd felt in that cramped Queens apartment, coding by lamplight while my family slept. 3 months ago, Microsoft offered me a promotion to Vice President of Global Accessibility Initiatives. The role would involve expanding our inclusion programs internationally and developing partnerships with organizations worldwide. It was exactly the kind of traditional success my parents would have celebrated. I turned it down. Instead, I'd proposed creating an independent research institute focused on neurodiversity and innovation. Microsoft agreed to fund the project as a partnership rather than an acquisition, allowing me to maintain control over the vision and direction. The Institute for Cognitive Innovation would be based in Queens, in a renovated warehouse 3 blocks from my apartment. We'd hire researchers, developers, and support staff who brought their own experiences with learning differences to their work. "You're building something that will outlast all of us," David had said when I explained the decision. "Generational impact instead of quarterly profits." Last week, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through my lawyer's office. It was from Gerald, written from federal prison. Part confession, part justification, part plea for forgiveness. He claimed that seeing my success had triggered memories of his own struggles with learning differences, that stealing from me had been a twisted attempt to reclaim achievements he felt society had denied him. I read the letter once and threw it away. Gerald's motivation didn't matter anymore. What mattered was ensuring that other people with learning differences had better options than crime when society failed to recognize their potential. The Institute's opening ceremony was scheduled for next month. Emily would be there, having just passed the bar exam. My parents would attend, proud but no longer desperate to claim credit for my achievements. Agent Williams had agreed to speak about the importance of protecting intellectual property rights for innovative entrepreneurs. This afternoon, I was driving to the warehouse to check on renovation progress when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Jack Thompson?" asked a young voice, maybe 16 or 17 years old. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Marcus. I heard you speak at a conference last year about building technology that helps people like us. I've been working on some apps for students with ADHD, and I was wondering if you might have time to look at them." I smiled, remembering the stranger who'd approached me in Harvard Yard with an envelope that changed everything. "Marcus," I said, "I'd be very interested in seeing your work. Can you meet me at my office next week?" "Really? You'd actually look at stuff created by a high school kid. Some of the best innovations come from people who see problems differently," I replied. "Age doesn't matter. Fresh perspective does." After hanging up, I thought about the question it'd been asked to include for viewers. Have you ever been underestimated by people who were supposed to support you? How did you turn that disappointment into motivation for your own success? The truth is, being underestimated was the greatest gift my family ever gave me, even though they didn't mean it as a gift. Their low expectations forced me to develop internal validation instead of seeking external approval. Their disappointment taught me to measure success by impact rather than recognition. If you're watching this and feeling like the disappointment in your family, the one who doesn't fit traditional expectations, I want you to know something. You're not broken. You're not limited. You're not less than. You're different, and different is where innovation begins. The people who underestimate you today might become your biggest supporters tomorrow, but only if you first become your own biggest supporter. Build something meaningful, solve problems that matter to you, and success will follow in ways that surprise everyone, including yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe for more stories about turning struggle into strength, and share this with anyone who needs to hear that being different is actually being valuable. I hope your own journey from disappointment to triumph brings you the same peace and purpose it brought me. Remember, the family that calls you the dumb one today might be calling you our inspiration tomorrow. But more importantly, you'll be calling yourself exactly what you've always been: enough.